Hi, this is Laurie Mangold, and today this video is about how to do the paper piecing for the big block. It's big block 8 rectangle. It's 5. I think it's rectangle 6. Well, I'm not worried about that. And I wanted to do paper piecing because as an advanced block, we've been doing a lot of advanced techniques. So what I want to do first is talk about setting up your space for paper piecing. Paper piecing is where we are going to build our block on a paper foundation, and we are going to sew on this side, and the block will be built on this side, and you're going to see that happen here. So when we paper piece, there are certain things you have to do between every step, and one of them one of them is sewing. So when you paper piece, you want to have your sewing machine ready. Then you want to have your workspace to fold and cut. You need to have a cutting mat and a pressing surface. Obviously, this is a bolt of fabric. I would use a wool mat, but I took it home and forgot to bring it back. So really important. If you don't set up like this and have everything right here, you're going to be getting up and down between every piece of fabric to go to your cutting station and go to your ironing station. So when you paper piece, you want to set yourself up so that everything is within arm's reach. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is when you paper piece, you do need to create your templates. Now, everybody who teaches paper piecing has their favorite medium that they like to create their templates on. I am a freezer paper girl, and so we do sell freezer paper on 8.5 by 11 inch sheets that I ran right through my inkjet printer because I designed the blocks and I had them that way. You can also, in your kits, you will have all of these printed. You can do them right on the copy paper if you want, or you can copy those onto freezer paper. What reason I like freezer paper is, as you know, one side is waxed, and that's not the side we print on. So when I press the fabric, the wax melts slightly and the fabric adheres to this, so that as I'm flipping back and forth, which you're going to see me do a lot, I don't have to worry about my fabric falling off or readjusting. So I like freezer paper. So I use the 8.5 by 11 sheets. A lot of times your things that you're paper piecing are much bigger than 8.5 by 11. And so you can use good old Reynolds freezer paper and pull out whatever size you need and put it over your block and trace it. So this is very acceptable also. And I know I'm working on a Tula Pink pattern where I traced all of her patterns onto freezer paper because that's my medium of choice. We also sell Carol Doak, who I almost want to say is she's not the inventor of paper piecing, but she made it really popular many, many years ago. And some of the techniques I use are from her. And she has her own brand of paper piecing paper. This is the 8.5 by 14, which is legal size. We also have an 8.5 by 11 that you can run through your printer. And if you don't want to run it through the printer, you can just lay it over the top and trace it. So just know that there's lots of different mediums. I know people who do it on interfacing. I know that there's interfacing out there that melts away. So when you get done, if you want to spritz it, the foundation will go away. So there's lots of different things you can use. But I'm going to use freezer paper. I always paper piece with freezer paper. The other thing that's real important that you have is an add-a-quarter ruler. Do you have to have it? No. Does it prevent you from making lots of mistakes? Yes. And all it does is, if you look at the ruler, there's a little lip right here. And from that lip to the edge is 1/4 inch. I don't know if you can see that. So when we go to trim, we have to trim our fabric between each step. We're going to use this lip to put against the seam so that we know we're always trimming 1/4 inch away. Because if you trim right on the line, you've lost your seam allowance. You're going to have to start over again. So this saves you having to remember to do that. The other side of this is a narrow surface because we're going to have to fold the paper quite a bit, and we can use this to fold against. The other thing I like to use to fold against is oftentimes a piece of cardstock. So I'll pull this out and I'll use this to fold again so that I can fold straight, but I'll show you both ways, okay? So those are all of the tools that I use. Obviously a rotary cutter is important too. In your directions, I kind of went through the steps, and when I used to teach paper piecing, I would give out a card like this that you could use, and it had all the, and I had shortened it a little bit, all the steps, because you're really going to be doing the same 4 steps over and over again. And if you remember what the last one was you did, and you know what the next one is, you will not get lost. This will be fairly easy paper piecing because you've only got 2 fabrics to worry about. When you're doing a complicated blocks and there's lots of fabrics, it can get, and some of the pieces get super tiny, it can get a little more hairy, but this is going to be a really easy paper piecing. Your foundations will be numbered, and that's the order of the fabrics you're going to put on. And in this case, not only did I had you pre-cut the background fabric, I had you cut 6-inch squares and cut them into triangles because a lot of these shapes are triangular. And then I had you cut 4 2.5 by 7-inch strips for the straighter pieces. So if you can look at your pieces, a lot of times they don't tell you how to pre-cut the fabric. And you're kind of taking your own fabric and figuring out how to put it on here. And if you can study the pattern a little bit, a lot of times you can pre-cut some things to make it easier. Okay, so that's why I had you pre-cut the fabric. So the first step is always placing the fabric. Now all of the colors I had you cut are 4.5 by 6-inch rectangles. And it doesn't say to cut them. You're going to use them as a whole piece. I just said to pre-shrink them. And what you're going to do, you're going to find piece number 1, and you're going to put the wrong side of this on the shiny side of the freezer paper, and you're going to cover up. You want to make sure you're completely covering your piece number 1, which is here in the center, right? And you want to make sure that there's an extra 1/4 inch all the way around. Well, if you look at the size piece I gave you, there's just no way it's, not going to work. So as long as you center it. Now I'm going to put it down and I'm going to use my iron, and I like a smaller iron usually, but I'm going to use my iron. I'm actually going to iron from this side. And if I heat this up, you can see that my fabric sticks. Okay, sorry. Can you see that my fabric sticks? I don't have to worry about pinning it on or holding it on or anything. It sticks, okay? And we're going to go through a couple of these, so follow along and see. Now, I have just placed the fabric for piece 1. Now I have to find number 2. This is number 2. So I have to cover up this number 2 area, and the rest of these pieces are going to be background or your light color. I am going to pre-trim the seam for this because this is huge. You can see that. So this is where Carol actually came up with the term the card trick. So I'm going to find the line between 1 and 2. I am going to, and I'll do it this time with the skinny end of the ruler, place the skinny end of the ruler on that line, and I'm going to peel back the paper like that, okay? I've got that peeled back on the line, and this is where the add a quarter is priceless. I'm going to slide that little ledge right against that fold of that freezer paper, and I am going to cut off anything, that sticks beyond that fold. So if you look at this now, you can see I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to flip my foundation back up so that it's flat, and I'm going to flip over. Now on here, I've indicated whether to use a strip or a triangular piece. This one says triangular. So I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to take one of the triangles that I had you cut, and I'm going to put the raw edges together, and I'm going to put it on here. Now I can see through this. I have to cover up this whole area here. So I kind of hold it where the 1/4 inch seam allowance is and flip, and you can see I've got it too far this way. It's not covering. So I'm going to slide that up a little bit and try again, and now it's covering. I'm covering up all my lines. It doesn't have to be pretty, it just needs to cover the space. So I'm good there, and now I'm going to flip it over. So we have pressed, we have trimmed, now we are going to sew, and I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to sew on that line. I think it just, no. I'm going to sew on that line.
Do you want me to move the camera over?
No, I can show them what I sewed. Okay. And I'm going to start a 1/4 inch before the line, and I'm going to sew on up, and I'm going to sew about a 1/4 inch past the line. Now, so if you look at this, what I sewed was right here. I started here and I stopped here because that's the distance of this piece, right? Now, they also recommend you may want to put a size 90 needle in, and you may want to shorten your stitch length. So, because what it will do is help perforate this, so when we have to remove the paper, it'll be easier to remove, okay? So, if I look at the steps, I pressed, I did the card trick, I folded, I trimmed, I sewed, and now I'm going to have to put the next piece on. So I got to press again. So I am going to flip this over and flip this up, and I'm going to take it to my ironing surface, and I'm just going to press that seam and press it on off so that it is ready for the next piece. Okay? Now, if I'm looking at this, all that's important is that I have fabric coming out all the way to the edge. And I've got some sticking out beyond that, and that is okay. I'd rather have extra. This is a little close, but it makes it. I'd rather have extra than not enough. Okay, so that piece is done. So we've done 1 and we've done 2. Now we have to find piece 3. And piece 3 is down here, and I have this line between 1 and 2 and 3, so that is the next line I have to prepare. So I'm going to do, we've just pressed, so the next thing we're going to do is the card trick. I'm going to put, this time I'm going to use the card, and I'm going to peel this back, and you just peel the fabric off of it, like that. This is freezer paper from my house. It's probably 10 years old, so it doesn't stick as well as I normally would like, but that's okay, it works. I'm going to take my outer 1/4 ruler, tuck it in right against there, and you trim off anything that sticks out beyond that. And then I have my seam allowance again. I'm going to flip my foundation back up, and I'm going to flip it over. And this one says triangle also. So I'm going to align this triangle, and you always want to flip up. And how am I doing? I'm going to scooch it down just a little more because I have another piece here. Now, let me do this. Let me make sure.
Check it before you wreck it.
Yeah, this looks fairly good. I redid some of my shapes, and I think we're going to be okay. And I'm going to take that, and now I'm going to go sew that again on that line. And if you sew it and you realize that you didn't cover everything, you just rip it off and sew it again. It's not the end of the world. It happens all the time because as you get better at paper piecing, you try to start skimping and using smaller and smaller pieces, and then you realize that you've goofed. But now I have this one on there, and I'm going to flip this up, and it looks good. So I'm going to pull that out, and I'm going to press. Okay, see that? And I know it looks really weird right now. It's like, how can that ever turn out to be anything? But what I'm looking at is I do have fabric all the way around. Now I have one piece left, and it's number 4. And so 4 is going to cross all 3 of the previous pieces. So we just pressed. The next thing we're going to do is the card trick. I'm going to put it on the line, fold this back, right? And if it's sewn into there, just give it a little tug. Put my add a 1/4 down, right? And as long as I'm trimming all the way across and I'm good, I don't have any gaps, then my piece is going to be good, okay? And now this one I said to use a strip. So we have these strips that are 7 inches long. When you have something at an angle, sometimes you have to play with where you place it so that when you flip it, it does cover the whole area. Because if I moved this way down here and I flipped it, this corner is not getting covered. And if I put it, way up here and I flipped it, now the bottom isn't getting covered. So you want to just kind of, set it up. And I'm just going to go this way a little bit. And then I'm going to stitch that one. All right, so I got that one sewn. I know it looks like a disaster, right? I'm going to take that and I'm going to press it. Normally I cut my foundations out to their seam allowance, and I didn't do that this time, which would help you see that everything was covered. But I'm going to give it a really good press here. And now we're done, and it looks like crap, doesn't it? It's not very pretty. But now we're going to trim it to the finished size. So let me grab my ruler. It's supposed to measure 4.5 by 6.5, I believe. Yep. And so I always trim my first line. You can't guarantee your printer or how you traced it is going to be exact. So I always trim my first line, and then I actually use the ruler and go over, this is actually 4.5 inches wide, and now I line that right up on the edge, and it should be very close to that line, and it is. And so I cut that. But this is a chance for you, if your template isn't perfect, it's a chance for you to make sure your piece is the right size. Then I'm going to go ahead, and when I trim this bottom one, I'm going to make sure that it should be 4.5, that my straight lines are here and my half is here. And I trim this one, and now this should be 6.5, and I actually can turn my ruler this way since it's 4.5 inches wide and put that 6.5 on there. Make sure it's all perfectly square. And if I look at it, the printer printed it slightly small. Not really. And look, there is your paper piece block. It looks much better now, doesn't it? And what's important to know is that you've got this line right here is the end of the block. From here to the edge is your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And normally I don't usually put paper there, but it's so easy to trim the seam allowance off when the paper's not there. And since some of you are beginners, I went ahead and drew that seam allowance in. So there's block number. This is actually, I think I picked up block number 2. Isn't that fun? Should I do another one real quickly?